It began like any other Monday morning, with commuters spilling into the streets of Manhattan, coffee in hand, headphones in ears, minds on meetings. But among the crowd was one man carrying something far more sinister than a laptop or gym bag. Jake Nolan walked with quiet determination, dressed in an ordinary coat, his hand clutching the strap of a duffel bag that weighed heavily, both literally and figuratively. Inside were a sledgehammer, a steak knife, and zip ties. This was no ordinary morning, and Jake Nolan was no ordinary man on his way to work. He was headed to the office of Dr. Michael Weiss, a respected psychiatrist with a private practice in a Manhattan high-rise. Jake wasn't going for an appointment, he was going there to kill. No disguise, no alias. He signed into the building using his real name. Security cameras captured him calmly entering, carrying the duffel bag. There was no attempt to hide his identity, no real effort to escape afterward either. When asked later what he intended to do when he walked through that door, Jake said it plainly: "I intended to kill him." This wasn't a whodunit. Jake Nolan did it. Everyone agreed on that. The real mystery, the part that turned heads and shook even seasoned investigators, was the question of why. Jake Nolan claimed he wasn't acting on his own. According to him, this was no spontaneous act of violence. He was manipulated, conditioned, and coerced by none other than his own cousin, Dr. Pamela Bookbinder. And not just any cousin. Pamela was an Ivy League-educated psychiatrist, a brilliant woman, a successful professional, someone who, on the surface, embodied stability and trust. But Jake described her very differently, as dangerous, cold, and capable of orchestrating murder through psychological warfare. Jake said it started small. Pamela was helping him, offering therapy, support, a place to stay. He had been struggling for years with mental illness, and she seemed like a lifeline. She gave him structure, responsibility, and made him feel wanted. But under the surface, he claimed, something darker was happening. Subtle conversations turned into emotionally charged manipulation. Slowly but surely, she introduced a narrative into Jake's mind. That Dr. Michael Weiss, her ex-boyfriend, and the father of her child was a threat. According to Jake, Pamela and Weiss had been locked in a bitter custody battle over their son. But she didn't just vent to Jake, she planted vivid images in his mind. She told him that Weiss was abusive, negligent, even dangerous. Day by day, she wore him down. It felt like brainwashing, Jake would later say. You don't realize it is happening until one day you wake up and you're ready to kill for her. Pamela allegedly described Weiss in the most grotesque terms, and Jake began to see him not as a man, but as a monster. He claimed Pamela even joked about it, referencing the Beatles' song Maxwell's Silver Hammer, suggesting he should use a hammer to beat Weiss over and over again. Jake's mind, already fragile from years of mental health battles, began to spiral. Diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 5, Jake had always struggled. By high school, he'd experienced deep mood swings, periods of euphoria followed by crashes into depression. At 17, he tried to take his own life with a butcher knife. Hospitalized, diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and prescribed a cocktail of powerful medications, Jake never found stability. Some days, he was a gifted inventor who created an award-winning study app. Other days, he couldn't get out of bed, even when his parents begged. By his early 20s, Jake's life was chaotic, punctuated by breakdowns, hospital stays, and medication failures. It was around this time that Pamela reached out and offered help. She proposed that Jake live with her in Manhattan. She'd provide therapy, manage his medications, and in return, Jake would help take care of her 4-year-old son. To his parents, it felt like salvation. We trusted her completely, his mother said. She was family. She was a doctor. We thought this was the miracle we had been praying for. At first, it worked. Jake felt calm, needed, and appreciated. Pamela treated him like a partner, like someone who mattered. He was invited into her life, her routines, her family rituals. He even became the boy's godfather. For someone who had long felt broken and discarded, this new role was intoxicating. But it came at a cost. Jake claimed that the deeper he got into Pamela's life, the more isolated and obsessive he became. She allegedly filled his head with images of Michael Weiss as a predator. She said he was abusive to her and the child. She claimed he didn't pay child support, that he was harming their son. There was no evidence to support these claims, but Jake believed her. "She made me hate him," Jake said. "She didn't just want him gone, she wanted him destroyed." It escalated quickly. Jake claimed Pamela proposed a plan. A map, hand-drawn, showing all the entrances to Michael Weiss's apartment building. A list of supplies. Surveillance footage would later confirm that Pamela accompanied Jake to a Home Depot where she purchased a sledgehammer, the same one police later found at the crime scene. Jake said she packed the weapons herself. The night before the attack, she rubbed his back and whispered how much she loved him. "You're my savior," she told him. "Tomorrow everything will be better once Michael is terminated." The next morning, Jake followed the plan. He entered the building, rode the elevator to the 12th floor, and waited until Weiss was done with a patient. Then he asked to speak with him about some financial documents related to the child. It was a cover. He wasn't there for paperwork. Jake slipped into the restroom and readied himself. When he came out, it all unraveled. He raised the sledgehammer, but Michael Weiss saw it just in time. The psychiatrist lunged, and the hammer missed its mark. A fight broke out. Jake pulled the knife. Both men were bleeding. Jake stabbed Weiss several times, in the chest, the back, the stomach. But the 6'3" doctor overpowered him and dragged them both into the hallway. Neighbors heard the screams, blood was everywhere. Then, in the aftermath of the chaos, Jake, still covered in blood, did something that would baffle investigators and horrify the public. He pulled out his phone and took a selfie. The image was chilling. Blood spattered across his face, soaking his clothes. In that moment, he didn't flee, he didn't hide. Instead, he texted Pamela. No response. "What do I do next?" he asked. Still nothing. Then finally, a single word, "Where?" Jake was arrested and hospitalized. As he recovered, his story emerged, a twisted tale of mental illness, manipulation, and a calculated plan of violence. To some, he was a pawn. To others, a liar trying to save himself. The debate over what really happened, and whether Pamela Bookbinder was truly behind the plot, was only just beginning. As Jake Nolan lay handcuffed to a hospital bed, recovering from wounds both physical and psychological, detectives began to dig deeper into his claims. The public had questions. The media was in a frenzy. Did Pamela Bookbinder really manipulate her cousin into attempting a brutal murder? Or was this just another delusion from a man already known for his mental instability? Jake was unwavering. He told authorities that Pamela had drawn the map, purchased the weapon, and given the final push the morning of the attack. He said she called him her hero, her savior, and convinced him that killing Michael Weiss was a necessary act of protection. But Pamela denied everything. Through her attorneys, she claimed she had no idea what Jake was planning. She never told him to hurt anyone, never gave him a knife, never packed a bag, and certainly never ordered a hit. Anything Jake did, she said, he did on his own. But the surveillance footage told a different story. There she was, Dr. Pamela Bookbinder, caught on camera at Home Depot, standing beside Jake, paying for the very same sledgehammer found at the crime scene. That video would become one of the most damning pieces of evidence. Still, prosecutors faced a challenge. There was no direct communication, no emails, no texts that explicitly instructed Jake to attack Dr. Weiss. Much of the case rested on Jake's own testimony, and Jake Nolan, by all accounts, was a troubled witness, diagnosed with bipolar disorder, in and out of treatment centers, known to abuse substances, a young man whose mental health history was as long as a CVS receipt. But his defense argued that's exactly why Pamela's manipulation worked so well. That's what made him the perfect puppet. Jake's parents supported that theory. They insisted Jake was not violent by nature. They described a kid who was loving, brilliant, and kind, but vulnerable. And desperate to feel important, Pamela, they believed, saw that and exploited it. Meanwhile, Michael Weiss was left with physical and emotional scars, multiple stab wounds, weeks of recovery, ongoing trauma, and a custody battle that now carried an entirely new level of darkness. But Jake didn't flee that day. He didn't try to run or hide. Instead, he snapped a photo of himself and texted Pamela, looking for further instruction, as if the entire act had been part of a script. As Jake's trial approached, prosecutors wrestled with how to present the case. There were contradictions, multiple versions of the story. Jake had at times claimed Weiss attacked him. At other points, he denied swinging the sledgehammer at all. Then, in one bizarre version, he claimed Weiss pulled the hammer from the bag and attacked first. To complicate things further, Jake also claimed he didn't want to torture Weiss, but Pamela did. He said she wanted the psychiatrist to suffer, that she wanted to inject him with poison, burn him alive and make it a spectacle. Jake said he drew the line. "I was willing to kill," he admitted, "but not to torture." Some viewed that as a chilling confession, others as proof that Jake was deeply confused. Still, one question haunted everyone. Why would Pamela want Michael dead? Then came the financial bombshell. Just 3 days before the attack, Michael Weiss had made Pamela the irrevocable trustee of a $1.5 million life insurance policy, money that would go to their son if Michael died, with Pamela in control of the funds. The timing was impossible to ignore. Jake insisted he had no idea about the policy. He claimed Pamela never mentioned money, only justice for her son. But prosecutors believed otherwise. They believed it was a motive hidden beneath layers of emotional manipulation. The trial was intense, and when Jake took the stand, the courtroom listened as he recounted the day of the attack, the duffel bag, the sledgehammer, the knife in his pocket, the blood, the selfie, and the silence from Pamela. Jurors were shown clips from Jake's psychiatric evaluations. In one, he describes Pamela's suggestion to use zip ties to restrain Weiss. "She wanted me to cut off his balls," he says flatly, "but that was a line too far for me." The prosecution argued this wasn't a man without free will. He was making choices, calculating his limits, deciding what parts of the plan he was willing to follow. But Jake's defense attorneys pushed for a different verdict, not guilty by reason of diminished capacity. They weren't denying the crime, but they argued that Jake's mental illness, compounded by manipulation from Pamela, made him incapable of understanding the full consequences. Their expert psychiatrist compared the situation to a cult, a two-person cult, with Pamela as the leader and Jake as the indoctrinated follower. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated, and in less than an hour, they returned guilty. Jake Nolan was sentenced to 9.5 years in prison for attempted murder. His family broke down in tears. His parents believed the sentence ignored the mental illness, ignored the manipulation, and ignored Pamela's role. But Pamela, she was still free. For years, she faced no criminal charges. She maintained her innocence. But Michael Weiss wasn't finished. He sued Pamela in civil court, presenting the same surveillance footage, the sledgehammer purchase, the map, the affectionate texts. And slowly, momentum began to shift. Then, in October 2017, 5 years after the attack, authorities made their move. Pamela Bookbinder was arrested. She was charged with second-degree attempted murder and first-degree assault. Finally, the law was catching up. But the case was far from simple. Pamela's lawyers argued that the charges were built on the word of a mentally unstable man, Jake Nolan. They pointed to a handwritten note found in Jake's hospital records shortly after the attack. In it, Jake wrote, "Pamela has nothing to do with this. I acted completely on my own." But the note, written during a manic episode and under heavy sedation, was never allowed in court. Pamela spent 5 years in jail awaiting trial, delayed by court battles and the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2022, she shocked everyone by accepting a plea deal, 11 years in prison. But just weeks later, she tried to take it back, claiming she was under duress, suffering from medication withdrawal, and was high from secondhand drug smoke on the transport bus. The judge rejected her plea withdrawal, and when Michael Weiss stood in court to read his victim impact statement, he made it clear he still feared Pamela, still looked over his shoulder, still believed she'd try to hurt him again. Pamela sat expressionless. Prosecutors didn't hold back. She plotted to bash his head in with a sledgehammer, they said. She used a vulnerable man as a pawn, and she did it for power, revenge, and possibly money. Pamela's lawyers accused the DA of turning sentencing into a theatrical performance, but the judge stood firm. If you plot to hit someone with a sledgehammer, he said, your intent is to cause death. And with that, Pamela Bookbinder was sentenced. She will serve her 11-year term in state prison. An order of protection was issued for Michael Weiss. Jake Nolan will likely be released first. He continues to serve his sentence, now with access to treatment. He still insists, had I never met Pamela Bookbinder, this would not be my story.